When it was announced that Star Trek Strange New Worlds would feature a musical episode, there was a lot of excitement. Not just from fans of the show, but the cast and crew as well, including cinematographer Benji Bakshi. When he and I spoke a few weeks ago, he could barely contain his excitement, although since the announcement hadn't been made, he couldn't exactly say why. As soon as it was announced, I knew I had to talk to Bakshi about it. It turns out his background and interests made him the perfect choice to work on the episode. I'm T. Rick Jones, and this is your Daily Star Trek News. Thanks for coming back. You're not my first repeat visitor, but this is the fastest I've ever had anybody back back on the show. So,
Great.
so
Well, there's so much to say.
yes, there is. And when last we spoke, you were very excited about episode 209 of the season. And offline, I fielded a guess that it was a musical episode, and I turned out to be right.
Ding,
And
ding.
very exciting. Um, and I'm not the only one that's excited about it. Everybody seems really excited about that episode, including the people involved. I know you were, and all the cast and crew, and everybody seemed to be really, really jazzed about doing that episode. So, why is it? When was the decision made to do an episode like that? And why was everybody so excited for that particular episode?
I've been holding my tongue since basically November 2021
Wow.
because that's when I first was in discussions with the showrunners and producing director Chris Fisher and Glenn Keenan, the season one cinematographer, about what was coming down the pipeline for season two. And they mentioned the musical. And that's when we had discussions about my background as a cellist sort of coming into play. And it's always been my explanation for my creative path, that I learned classical music as an instrument and learned the technicals of it, which once sort of mastered, I could express emotion and, in a way, story out of it. So that is what made me inclined to even pursue cinematography as a discipline within film, because I fell in love with the filmmaking medium and storytelling, but I didn't even know that cinematography existed until I went to college and was given a Bolex 16 millimeter film camera, and they said, "Here, use a light meter and go use this thing," and out comes film, hopefully properly exposed. And that's sort of the basis of the medium. And I thought, this is an instrument I can use and learn and master. This sounds great. So the discussions of the musical happened all the way back then. And I said, well, I'm a cellist and I have these instincts, and I understand the link between the musical side and the cinematography side and overall filmmaking. So they thought it was a really great idea, among other reasons, that we should collaborate. But they've been planting that seed all the way back. And then when we shot it, that was basically a year ago or more.
Wow.
And of all the episodes, since it had never been done, it was very tight-lipped, and I was a good little boy, and it didn't tell anybody. I don't even think I told some of my closest friends or family, because if once anybody hears, it's very hard to contain it.
Yeah. When did you get interested in playing the cello? How long have you been learning the cello? Have you played professionally very much? What's the story there?
My musical history goes back generations. My grandmother was a pianist. My mother's a pianist and still a piano teacher. My brother's a violinist. My wife is a violinist and pianist, and we met in the classical music scene as teenagers in about the high school age, and we were in the same circle. So that's how we met.
Huh.
So, with that comes sort of like family values and sensibilities and things like that. So we just sort of connected and realized that we had a lot in common. And she's a visual artist too. So we just, have a great creative sort of dynamic,
Yeah.
and that brought us together. So I've been really into and around music my whole life. And cello was something that I found among other instruments, basically between the ages of 5 and 8 or something like that. And I could have pursued it professionally. I was at the level in high school of national competitions and things like that. And I was touring with youth orchestras. We did tours in China and Russia, and I was in Puerto Rico. So it was really a big deal.
Yeah.
And we were really digging in hard. My teacher was in the Philadelphia Orchestra, and that whole scene was very serious about what it was doing. And that was really my life for a while. And if you call it a transition to filmmaking, it was sort of in parallel that, I was interested in illustration and other kinds of arts, also really into science, which is why I think Strange New Worlds is a really great fit for all of those things coming together, especially the musical episode, which I'll really get into in detail about why that is.
Yeah.
But it really was a pretty serious thing for me. And the sort of passion and drive for filmmaking eventually overtook the music centric focus, but it's always stayed with me, and I still play. Got my cello right here.
So getting back to the musical episode of Strange New Worlds, um, talk to me a little bit about how it all came together, and how your background helped in filming it, and just tell me everything. Tell me how it all happened.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, like almost everything in this show, really big credit to the showrunners, Akiva Goldsman and Henry Alonso Myers, and the writers and producers of the episode, who really believed in all the creative, which was in this instance taking a pretty big risk, you would say, doing something that had never been done before. And the first question we had was, why hasn't Star Trek done this before? And is this going to break it? Um, so, the first real work we began on the episode started from an outline, and the outline discussed, this is the plot, this is the mechanism, which talked about this subspace fold, which is the sort of scientific origin of the phenomenon that we're experiencing, where the singing becomes a alternate reality where emotion is expressed this way because they triggered it by sending music into the fold, and it sort of responded by forcing people to act this way. In a way, this becomes the antagonist or obstacle of the episode, that they feel like they want to get out of it by singing it to death in a way. So when we read that, we thought, well, that's just genius. But at that level, and it said, and then there's a song, and then this happens, and then there's a song, and we thought, okay, great. Well, when are these songs going to happen?
Yeah.
And about halfway through the season, we started to hear the early renditions of those songs. They were sung by other people. So we were listening to the lyrics and the music of the songs, but they weren't being sung by the actors yet. So it was hard to sort of imagine, because it almost felt like an accompaniment song.
Uh-huh.
We had a lot of conceptual work to do, like fully understanding how it was all going to tie together. And when the scripts became refined and were being distributed, that's when the director Dermot Downes, who also has a background as a cinematographer,
Oh, wow.
came on board, and we had an extra long prep time for this episode because it was my last one of the season, and my previous one had been number 6. So instead of sort of just hanging out, we really took all that time to try to scratch our heads on how to deal with this,
Yeah.
because in a sense we were shooting a normal Star Trek episode, which takes a certain amount of prep, and we're shooting 7 or 8 songs or musical numbers on top of it.
Yeah.
So the big question became, are these music videos or are they scenes?
Yeah.
And overwhelmingly, the whole creative team agreed these are scenes. These are not going to be, let's get a bunch of cameras and do some funky stuff and
Yeah.
let the edit sort of just take over, um, or shoot in parallel. We had an early idea of, especially during Spock's sort of uh, ballad or depressing soliloquy song, that we would do some kind of cool Depeche Mode thing and have static cameras, and he's over here and now he's over here and he's singing to the camera and he's doing all this. We thought, oh, that would be really fun, until we really um analyzed it and realized that's not really telling the story. That would be stylistically taking over and almost making a joke out of it.
Yeah.
So that was the genesis of the creative approach. And from there, it just became executing. We finally heard the actors recorded on the tracks, which really helped a lot because we could hear them put in their emotion, their understanding of the lyrics. And each actor, I think, also helped inform some of the songs. I don't know if there were lyric changes or just ways that they phrased it that really helped us understand the struggle and things behind the song.
Yeah.
Particularly La'an's song was this sort of internal um, struggle between her wanting to open up and change as a person versus her instinct of, but this is who I am and I've always been, and there's a reason I'm like this. And in the end of the song, she sort of says, no, I'm not going to change, at least for now. And she brought a lot of that out. And when we were filming it, we were really seeing and feeling her character emote. And it was powerful. There were certain takes when Dermot and I, the director, looked at each other and said, wow, I really understand that line. And she brought that out.
You have experience with music videos. You've done some music videos as well, I believe. Is that right?
That's right. And it's interesting. Sometimes these things end up on IMDb as, like, they call them short films or something like that.
Sure.
But I've probably done, I don't know, 50, professional music videos.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of experience with that. That said, that was an instinct in a way we were sort of trying to avoid.
Yeah, sure. And that really came out. I mean, you were definitely leaning more towards the musical theater than the music video. The only one that I thought might have been slightly inspired by music videos was actually La'an's.
We knew we were going to cut away. That was scripted.
Yeah.
And that section, you could say, was because it became her singing over non-dialogue shots in her fantasy.
Sure.
That said, I don't think that, as I recall, it intercut, like it didn't go back to her and then back to the sheets.
Right.
So this was sort of like a departure in her head, and then we came back and sort of motivated her dreaming about it and realizing, well, that can't be.
Yeah.
So, there was also a what you call montage sequence in the Una La'an
Yeah.
zero gravity
Right.
extravaganza,
Yeah.
where we're cutting around to the ship to see everybody else. sort of like, we called it like the Hallmark sequence, where everybody's just like looking at each other.
Yeah.
And we were doing it, we're like, what is this? What are we doing? But we thought, I think it's great. I think it's, you just sort of lean into it and go full, montage, emotional crew moment.
And it was all inspired by the Great American Songbook, or the storyline was, Uhura sends anything goes into the
Right.
rift, and that's what starts the whole thing. Um, how much do you folks like look at old musicals? The Anything Goes and all of that, the stuff from the Great American Songbook.
There was definitely some research. I know Dermot was pulling from a lot of different sources to wrap his head around what these could be. In the end, having sort of like gone down memory lane with a bunch of musical inspiration, we really just sort of went back to, let's just shoot what we feel these should be.
Sure.
The songs lended to a certain emotion. The um the blocking of the scenes, particularly Captain Pike's back and forth to the view screen. um we were there on set, and he had done his recording, which was a duet with Melanie, who plays Captain Battelle. And he Anson was there sort of figuring out the back and forth, and came up with this awesome idea that, okay, now he's turning away, he's going back to the crew, but then he whips back, and he's sort of like drawn back into the musical, and he's like literally putting his hand over his heart, and then gets down on his knees as La'an cuts it off, and he's like caught off guard. What am I doing? He came up with a lot of that.
That's
And really, Anson plays this sort of reserved character and has to be the one always sort of in view, but he was really into it, and he came up with all that. So the blocking itself sort of indicated the dance, if you will.
sure. Um,
That's especially in the finale, there was so much going on and how people were going to come together, and we worked with a choreographer. His name was Roberto.
okay.
And that indicated so much of what the blocking would be and how the dances would come together. And they came from the turbo lift, and they met in the front, and they did this thing. uh and then he would work with Dermot, and Dermot wanted Jess to spin around during this moment in the finale, because, I'm gonna miss the crew, things like that. So we had all these little moments we were doing, and a lot of them Dermot had a vision for. A lot of them Roberto informed the choreography, which there were several stages of choreography. He was working with dancers, and then the actors would go watch what the dancers were doing and give their notes on new ideas or what they wanted to do or didn't want to do. And then they would get into their own rehearsal doing the moves. And I was trying to watch as much of that as possible to get an advance on what we were going to need to shoot and how we could shoot it, like this move over here, how are we going to do all that. So it all really came together in a big collaboration. And when you're doing like a stage musical, I feel like there's a certain amount of presentation that you understand, because there's really one angle.
Sure.
But filming it, of course, it's almost like there's so many options. What angle are you going to present to? Especially at the very end when they're doing their chorus line, literally. We found that the frontal angle obviously got it all.
Yeah.
So we really had to let the choreography and music inform us.
How lucky are you guys that you have such a talented cast that can sing and dance and do all the stuff you needed them to do? You have all these people who are so talented and able to do everything you asked of them.
Absolutely. And they were so supportive of the concept, and, down to Ethan and Babs. Um, and they definitely trusted the team to not make them look silly. I mean, in some ways we did, right? But
Sure.
I think when it was on purpose. So definitely it was a thrill. And the funny thing from my perspective of, I mentioned I was interested in science. I pursued physics and specifically astrophysics because it's just the most interesting, I
Sure.
think, avenue of it
Yeah.
in college. And I was juggling music, filmmaking, and astrophysics. And I worked as an intern in a lab where they were going to study dark matter. And we were trying to develop a sensor that could record micro interactions really fast. So I
Yeah.
was there kind of like running tests with an oscilloscope, like trying to find the fastest timing of this sensor. Anyway, having worked in a lab and doing all this stuff, I realized that the thing that gave me the most excitement was the story around the science. And
Sure.
so I chose filmmaking as the path, but all three of these things came together in this episode because the science caused and informed the music. And
Yeah.
then the storytelling, filmmaking skills were utilized to actually bring it to life. So to me, it was like, well, yeah, this is like makes a lot of sense why I'm here doing this. And it felt great.
Did they take that into account when they asked you to do the episode?
I think that the discussion naturally went that way. I don't know that they were looking for, we need someone who understands science and is a cinematographer.
Yeah.
But because of who I am and how Trek was a natural fit for me, I think that when deciding who would shoot which episode, it just made the most sense.
There are a couple of shots I want to talk about, specifically in the finale. A couple of really cool shots. First of all, my favorite shot in the entire episode is when you're traveling down the corridor during the finale, and the red shirts are all running around chaotically, and then the camera spins, and as it's spinning, they coalesce into one group and then start dancing down the corridor. I just thought that was so cool. And the other shot in the finale that I want you to talk a little bit about is uh, the one again. It's a spinning shot where the Enterprise and the two Klingon Katinga battle cruisers are spinning, and you're pushing in on the Enterprise, and you see through the window the cast doing their dance, and then you go inside for the rest of it. How did you achieve those two shots?
Well, first of all, really all the credit to Dermot, the director. Those were shots he came up with, and he, inspired us to pull them off. The first one in the corridor, of course, this is also in conjunction with the choreographer who, was having them do the chaotic running and then the timing of which they came together and did the thing. And I was working with Roberto, like, oh, they can't come too close to the camera and they need to come together in this way, in this timing. So that was a great collaboration there. But technically, how we pulled that shot off, it was the hallway shot, it was on a dolly that they were, I believe we had two people pushing the camera dolly. It's a big, heavy device. And our camera was on a remote head that's called a matrix head. And it's basically balanced and free floating, if you will. I mean, it's attached by motors, but it can do a what we call a third axis roll at any point. So sometimes we utilize that for creative reasons. We did that in episode 4 when Ortegas is back at the helm after being confused outside Rigel 7, and she starts to navigate the ship and really sort of like use it like a race car, and the camera leans and tilts to accentuate the sort of like gravity of her speed. So we used that head and timed it to where we have someone operating the two axes. Francois is our camera operator, and we had the head tech, his name is Ryan, on what we call the third axis wheel, and he goes and spins the wheel until it flips all the way over. So it was a dance in the camera department as well. And there is a way, I believe, to maybe have done that in visual effects or something like that, but you lose resolution and blur, and in some ways you just sort of like need to see it to know that the timing was right. So we really wanted to get it in camera, and I believe we got it on like take two, and maybe it was later, but we did a few more just to say, can we do it better? And after a few more takes, we said, no, we totally got it.
That's
But it
amazing.
was a great moment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then the flying through space into the view screen, that was a Dermot, brainchild. And there was discussion about the logic of what you actually see in the view screen, because you're actually looking at a screen that's, is it supposed to have electronics behind it, or what really is it? And I believe they sorted that out in order to show that particular shot. So once that was sorted out, the visual effects obviously is taking us towards the screen, but we had to finish the camera move as we landed. And so it was basically a takeover where the visual effects did this, and then our live action shot blended in at the end.
You mentioned that Dermot is a cinematographer as well. Do you um do you work differently with a director who's got cinematography experience? Can you communicate with them differently?
I think that there's a shorthand. There are sometimes directors who don't have a camera background who rely more on me to guide them into what can and can't be done.
Sure.
And usually the directors who don't have a technical or camera background are more focused on the actors, not more, but that's sort of their full focus. I have to sort of read their needs and support what they're trying to do to make sure they get a great performance and they don't feel inhibited by the technicals. In Dermot's case, he has such a strong grasp of it that he sees shots and, basically decides these are the ones we should try to get with my consultation, because, he hadn't worked on this show before. And sometimes there's massaging. I'll come up with an idea or a way to modify, and does this feel natural or not? But there was a lot of trust there. And, I followed his lead in terms of the sequencing because he really had broken it down. So because of that, this could have been a very different experience with a director who didn't have a camera background. But because he did, we were focused on the execution by the time we were on set, instead of what sometimes happens as a finding process. So I think that was a decision by, the show to work with somebody who had a really strong forethought, and was able to envision this before the day. I do want to comment on the, if something didn't work. And that was a discussion we had about how far should we go with essentially magical realism.
Yeah.
And you could say, well, this singing and dancing thing is all make believe anyway. So let's just go Chicago, and let's go flashing lights, and let's let's do glitter, you
Yeah.
know?
Uh-huh.
Uh, but we decided the ship is not going to all of a sudden have lighting that it doesn't have. It's not going to shoot confetti cannons for no reason. We decided that the effect was emotional. It was within the characters. The lighting cues we pushed, we think, to the max, possibly beyond the logic a little bit for entertainment purposes. Like in the engineering, it's a little bit moodier when Celia's singing, and then when she sort of comes to her revelation and the music hits, it gets a little brighter. But we didn't add non-diegetic lighting, which means not of the story.
Right.
So that I feel that was the right choice, and how we were able to keep this sort of zany idea from feeling just arbitrary. and it came off the way you described. So we decided not to break it by turning it into, you know, a stage piece.
Benji Bakshi, thank you once more for joining me and talking about your art. This has been so much fun. And we got to do it again in season 3 whenever that happens.
Let's see. Thanks for having me again. I knew when we first spoke that this was going to be one that we couldn't not talk about, but it was still a secret. So, you know, now it's out of the bag, and glad we got a chance to debrief.
What did you think of Subspace Rhapsody? Email us your review at info@dailystartreknews.com and we might publish it. Also, to learn more about the musical inspiration behind the episode, read my article, How the Great American Songbook Inspired a Star Trek Episode, on www.dailystartreknews.com. And if you want to ensure we continue to make content like this, why not support us on Patreon? Your donation not only helps us afford the hosting fees for our website and podcast, but also helps us to pay our writers. Even a donation of as little as $1 a month helps to keep us running. Head over to www.patreon.com/Daily Star Trek News to help us out.